Hey there, this is Hannah, Chief Rebel at DeSkills. Imagine your high schooler could learn to harness artificial intelligence to solve real world problems for small businesses and nonprofits. Imagine they could get paid doing these impact projects on the weekends or summer break. And imagine that as a result, they could leave high school with more experience and connections than most college graduates. That's DeSkills. Learn more at deskills.io. That's dskills.io.
This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book What School Could Be.
Hey everyone, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast. I am your host, Josh Rapoon. Before we start the show, please check out all the resources at whatschoolcouldbe.org and our global online community. If you are a committed education change agent ready to roll up your sleeves and reimagine teaching and learning, simply install the What School Could Be app on your mobile device or navigate to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org. I hope to see you there. Months ago, a colleague of mine alerted me to an EdWeek article titled, "An Unorthodox Plan to Pay Students to Write Curriculum is Raising Achievement," which describes some very unusual work being done by Dr. Kate Maxlow, an educator on the East Coast. The article opens with this, quote, "Kate Maxlow admits to being the first person in the room to get bored. As a teacher, she worked overtime to keep her elementary students engaged, but privately wondered if some content is just destined to be dry. She changed her mind the day her daughter, sick with a 100-degree fever, pleaded to be allowed to go to the last day of summer math camp. The 10-year-old had spent a week learning about patterns and writing code, and the work was set to culminate in a big escape room challenge." Maxlow, the Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment for the Hampton City Schools on Virginia's eastern coast, wished all students would be so excited by their classwork that a sick day would come as a bitter disappointment. "I've always thought that schools need to do a better job of being innovative and engaging students, but I figured out there were just some subjects you can't make fun," Maxlow said. "I realized then that it is possible to do, even if it's not easy or obvious." So listeners, what you will hear over the next hour plus is a deep dive into Dr. Maxlow's life, her work, the way she thinks, and her hopes and dreams for education. Here is just the highlight reel of her life experiences. Dr. Maxlow received her bachelor's in history from the University of Virginia, then spent a year and a half dressing in colonial garb, working as a historical interpreter at Colonial Williamsburg. She then attended the College of William and Mary, where she earned her master's in elementary education. She worked for 7 years in the Newport News public school system in Newport News, Virginia. After time spent researching teacher evaluation, in 2014, she returned to work in public schools by accepting a job as the professional learning coordinator at Hampton City Schools. During her work there, she completed a PhD in educational leadership and became the Director of Innovation and Professional Learning. During this time, she helped lead the charge to revamp the entire Hampton curriculum, a key component to Hampton going from 41% to 100% of schools being fully accredited without conditions in 4 years. In 2023, she became the Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. Going forward, Dr. Maxlow will be Coordinator of Curriculum and Assessment, a consulting role for the Hampton City Schools. And I am excited to share, back in 2020, Dr. Maxlow received the Virginia Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development Leadership Award for her work coordinating efforts to innovate the Hampton City Schools curriculum. 2 programs you will hear about in this episode are Future of Learning Experience, or FLEX, and the Hollywood to Hampton project. Stay tuned, listeners. It's going to be great. In the About section of her website, I found the following, which I think is a great lead out to this episode introduction. In her spare time, Dr. Maxwell adores spending time with her husband, James, two delightfully precocious children, Lyra and Esmeralda, and their Muppets/Doodle dogs, Barkley and Pippin. As a family, minus the dogs, they both frequent and build their own escape rooms and enjoy singing off-key to Broadway musicals, end quote. And now, here's my conversation with Dr. Kate Maxlow. Kate Maxlow, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
So, Kate, you shared with me that you are an avid fan of fun facts. So here are some things you have explored that I definitely have not. The number of species that are beetles, the Vikings' recipe for bacterial infections, Egyptian mythology and Marvel comics, skincare secrets, and how toddlers learn mathematics. So we don't have time to talk about all these fun facts. So let's have you explain to our listeners how toddlers learn math logarithmically. So what does that mean, Kate? And more importantly, how is knowing how toddlers learn math a way to understand the magic of the mundane that surrounds us here on planet Earth?
I first learned about how toddlers learn math when I had a toddler myself. So, of course, I found it eminently fascinating. I was listening to a podcast and then later went and looked up the actual article and literature that it was based upon. But, when we adults use math, we count by ones, right? 1, 2, 3. And we have this understanding that 2 is, 1 less than 3, et cetera. And we think of the distance between, say, 1 and 2. That's the distance of 1 is the same as between 11 and 12, also the distance of 1. But with babies, what they see is that they think logarithmically, which means that the difference between 1 and 2 is, that's doubled. That's a huge difference as opposed to the difference between 11 and 12. That's actually a very small, the part of 1 is a very small percentage of the total of 11. So it's not that big of a change at all. So that's really just all that logarithmic means is how much of a change is there in difference in quantities. And they've done studies with babies to see, parts of their brains that light up when they're looking at different quantities, and they see almost no difference between the numbers 11 and 12, whereas they'll see a huge difference between 1 and 2 or 10 and 100. So that's really all that it means. But I found that incredibly fascinating with, teaching my own toddler and realizing that you have to teach them this, how to count by ones. That is not an innate thing that people are born with. And what that made me, I was a 4th grade teacher at the time, and I was realizing that some of my kids who struggled with number and number sense, it's because they hadn't had enough of those experiences to override that original, logarithmic thinking. And so I'd always been told that you're supposed to use manipulatives in the math classroom, right? You're supposed to be using unifix cubes, base 10 blocks, but I never really understood why. And suddenly I was like, oh, I get it, because that's how the human brain works. And so this is a step that we need to take, but much like with reading, there has to be a process for it. We can't just show kids how to do the algorithm with, written numerals and be like, okay, got it, moving on. And so understanding that even babies have this, innate perception of math, and that humans, in fact, have a very intuitive understanding of mathematical concepts really helped me realize that everybody is a math person. We are born math people. What we are not born is with the understanding of how humans have created a system for counting. And so everybody can learn math. It's just, have you had enough experiences with this other system to truly be able to understand how to manipulate numbers?
And where does the magic come in, Kate? I mean, I know that's a crazy question, but where does the
Right.
magic come in?
So, part of the magic for me is just in this idea that babies have mathematical understandings, right? I mean, who knew that?
Yeah.
But there's all of these amazing things going on in their brains and things that I would have never known about except that I just happened to listen to this podcast. And I'm someone who, I grew up loving fantasy and magic and all this and just realizing that there's so many crazy facts like this just surround us all the time if you're just open and curious and ready to learn, that there's just so many adventures to be had in everyday life if you're just open to it.
And I think that you said in the intake form that you were just sort of bananas over the idea that most of the species on Earth are beetles.
Yes, I
Crazy
think it's
pants. That's what you said. Crazy pants.
yes, 1 out of 4 species is a beetle. I actually saw that originally on a meme on social media
Mm.
that, said, look at 3 of your friends. The 1 out of every 4 species is a beetle, so that means one of you is a beetle, which of course is ridiculous. But then I went and looked it up, and it's not true that 1 out of every 4 people is a beetle, but it is true that 1 out of every 4 species, or 1 out of every 5, I forget which one exactly, is a beetle. And to me, like, I had no idea. I don't come across beetles in my everyday life. I'm not a big outdoors person. And so to think that there's just that many beetles, it just blows my mind.
Yeah, yeah. What I love here is that you're digging really deeply into, I don't know, maybe the jargon these days is the science of learning, but it feels to me as if that kind of curiosity is something that we just want to keep fostering in kids throughout their entire lives when they're in our school system. And it was just fascinating to me to think about what was going on in your brain as you sort of react to all of these things that really pique your curiosity and stimulate the magic inside you, you know? And I think it's a great way to get to know who you are right out of the gate. We could spend all day talking about beetles and, Vikings recipe for bacterial infections, but we have to move on. So I love asking guests about the service they perform outside of their so-called regular jobs. And I think what educators do outside their campuses speaks volumes about who they are and what they value. And in your case, you're a board member for First Spark, a nonprofit in Virginia that works to prepare young children for kindergarten and beyond. So if where we spend our time is what we value, Kate, First Spark is clearly important and valuable to you. So our listeners would love to know more. What moves you about First Spark?
I have always loved working with young children. So, that's probably where it originally comes from. I love the way that really young children think. I love the fact that their leaps of logic are absolutely astounding, sometimes in breathtakingly amazing ways and sometimes in breathtakingly strange ways.
Yes.
But more so than that, with my work as an educator, I've seen the difference that different environments can supply to students. And even getting back to how we learn math, so much of how we do in school is based upon the experiences that we have and the training that we have in those different habits of mind, like you were saying, like the science of learning. And so being able to give all students, regardless of their background, those experiences that they need to think in, scientific or mathematic or literate ways,
Mm.
that's what's really needed to give everyone a leg up and, ensure success for all of our young people.
Mhm. So, Kate, take us into the weeds a little bit with First Spark. Like, how does it work? Maybe allow us to be sort of observers looking through the window, if you will, on what actually happens at First Spark and how that works and what moves you about it as you interact with First Spark.
Sure. So the purpose of First Spark is to really not to work exactly with the students, but to provide the support that is needed for the
Mm.
students to get those experiences. So they do a lot of training for, teachers and other educators who work in early childhood. They help to come up with, what should the the standards for what it should look like in terms of going into a classroom for early childhood, what supports and services are needed, how can we get information about those supports and services that already exist to the people who need them. And then there's a big piece for, legislation and advocacy as well, helping government officials and legislators who actually make laws and rules about early childhood understand
Mm.
the needs that exist for not just the young people, but also for their families as well.
Wow, that's so interesting. And then what is your role, just to kind of complete the thing? What is your role as a board member for First Spark?
So as a board member, we do all the usual stuff. So look at the strategic planning. We help with fundraising and development in that way. Look at what are some of the governing structures. One of the big things that I'm working on right now is the current executive director is about to retire. So
Mm-hmm.
I am working on the hiring committee for that because I've done a lot of hiring in my daily work. So looking at, well, what are the qualities that we want in a new executive director? What kind of background experiences should they have? Coming up with interview questions, all those kinds of things.
That's super interesting, Kate, because I think one of the themes that I did not expect, but has really crept into a lot of the episodes that I do is leadership succession. And it's a phenomenally interesting thing and sometimes fraught with all sorts of complications and difficulties. But it sounds like you're right in the middle of that. So Kate, this is a perfect segue then to my next question. You shared with me that after majoring in history in college and getting your master's in elementary education, you began your teaching career in an inner city Newport News, Virginia school where you were fulfilled in what you described as a, quote, truly magical way for the first time, which is quite a statement. So what is that story? That journey is anything but a straight line of achievement. And how did student engagement and hands-on learning become part of your pedagogical DNA almost right out of the gate?
I've always been a person who really likes to be challenged. And so I originally applied for a school that was right near where I lived. And the principal hired me, but then he was told that he was moving to a different school that was going to be, have a much higher clientele with lower socioeconomic status. And he was like, look, they need teachers. Are you willing to come? And I didn't know any better. I was 24. And so I was like, sure, why not?
Wow.
And it was very eye-opening. I come from a very middle-class background. So the challenges that my students faced were obviously very different from how I grew up. And I quickly learned that there is a real need to listen and to affirm not only the challenges that those students face, but also all the strengths that they bring with
Mm,
them. I mean, I know it sounds cliche, but they taught me as much as I think I taught them, especially my first year, because who knows what they're doing in their first year of teaching.
yeah.
And but having those relationships with students who in some cases really needed an adult figure that they could trust and rely on. It was I finally for the first time was like, oh, this is my purpose. I as you can tell from my list of interests, like I'm interested in so many different things in life. And so I had was gone back and forth on what am I going to do when I grow up and what do I want to be. And I mean, it was everything from I'm going to be a detective to I'm going to be a writer to I'm going to be a nurse practitioner. But
Mm,
then finding myself in a room full of young people who wanted to be detectives or writers or nurse
mm,
practitioners and realizing that I could help them do all those things. And because of that, I didn't have to pick the one thing and I could, help them on their paths. That was just, I think that's what the magic was for me.
mm.
So
Yeah. That's awesome. I want to just go a little bit deeper on one part of this, Kate. One of my former guests on this show, and in some ways, he's a treasured friend, longtime educator, and he's become sort of a bit of a co-producer on the show because he's always landing guests for me. His name is Robert Landau. He's a specialist in Clifton Strengths. And I wonder what he does, by the way, Kate, is just like almost voodoo magic. It's when he does your strengths assessment, it's like he's looking deep into your soul. He knows you. And what I would love to know more about is, I think we say a lot, Kate, about it's almost become maybe cliche to say, well, what's really important is that every kid has at least one adult that they trust in the school that they're at. And that's great. But I think you take it to a different place, which is actually understanding the strengths of kids rather than treating them as deficits. You see them as a bundle of strengths that you're sort of uncovering. And I guess the question is, how do you do that? Or what did you notice way back then about what that process was like of figuring out that each kid had their strengths?
Absolutely. So I think of it a little bit differently too, as in like there are strong personality characteristics,
Mm,
and your strong personality characteristic can be your greatest strength. In some cases, it can also be one of your biggest weaknesses,
for sure.
just depending on how you use it. And I talk about this all the time with one of my kids who definitely is, on the ADHD spectrum. And
Mm,
some people, I've never been diagnosed, some people might think I am as well. But, so the ability to synthesize a ton of information and to be really creative and to hold all, several different ideas in the head at one time, that's an amazing strength if I know how to use it properly. But if
mm,
I instead don't, use the strategies and teach myself how to aim that creativity in a positive way, I end up doing nothing and I'm just kind of all over the place.
mm,
And so that's really what I try to help young people understand is that it's not even about strengths and weaknesses. It's about what are your strong personality traits and
mm,
how do we use them to accomplish your goals? And if they're not currently accomplishing your goals, what strategies do we need to implement in order to get better? And everybody has strong personality traits or things that their brain naturally does really well. So it's not a matter of who's smart and who's not. I often joke, for instance, I have no sense of spatial relations. Like I literally cannot remember which is my left and which is my right. People
mm,
tell me make the L with your hands and I will literally forget which way an L goes. Like it is
mm,
that bad.
mhm.
And there are some societies where they don't even ask how are you. They ask something along the lines of like how do you go? And you're supposed to say the direction you're traveling in. And I just think if I grew up in one of those societies instead of a society that prize like logic and literacy skills,
Yeah.
I would be in a very different class than the classes that I was in. And so it's all about what does society pick out, but as the important thing, and then how do we get better at that? But also what makes each person who they are and what are their goals? And then how do we use what you're already born with in order to help you achieve those goals?
Wow, that's just so interesting. So, Kate, one more question before we go to our first break, and I think it's actually another segue because it's about getting to know Kate Maxlow and what makes her tick and how she thinks and what she does. So, my wife suggested I watch recently. This was just a couple of weeks ago. Watch a documentary film on Amazon Prime titled "The Blue Angels," which is a deep dive into the process of becoming a Blue Angels jet pilot. And like, Kate, wow, like talk about being blown away by the idea of learning by doing. Very high stakes, I will say. So I wonder if our national conversations around what school could be are lacking, Kate, because we rarely include organizations that focus heavily on the ancient idea of the internship slash apprenticeship or learning by doing. And this could be a moment where you share what you, the military brat, learned growing up in Department of Defense schools as opposed to our public schools. What are your thoughts about this?
So that's interesting that you brought that up because my dad actually did fly fighter jets.
Wow.
Yeah, he did, and he actually taught others how to teach fighter or
Oh,
how to fly
amazing.
fighter jets as well.
I'm glad I asked.
I
Cool.
know.
Yeah.
That's too perfect. So I only went to Department of Defense schools through fifth grade,
Hmm.
but I did not realize how advanced they were at the time because my teachers had me in reading groups and I was always using, Unifix cubes in math class and base 10 blocks. And it's not until I was looking back that I realized how much they had incorporated the science of learning. And it wasn't until I came to Virginia, when my dad was stationed at an Air Force base here, that I
Hmm.
realized that, oh, not all schools are like that. That,
Hmm.
because I had seen movies and things where, it's the teacher at the front of the classroom, thinking of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and it's just like Bueller, anyone. And I just thought that was ridiculous. I didn't realize that there actually are some classrooms like that
Hmm.
until I actually experienced some of them. So I absolutely think you're right that we need to be moving from the factory model of education that came around, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And two, it's not about just pouring as much knowledge into your head as possible. It's really about what are you going to do with that knowledge. And so I think you're absolutely right that there needs to be more internships and work-based experience learning. First of all, it's what our kids want. They know they can look up anything on Google, so just memorizing facts is not going to cut it for them.
Hmm.
But also, it's what our society really needs.
And so I want to take this just one more different direction before we go to break. The thing that really jumped out at me in the Blue Angels documentary was the teamwork and how you train as teams. And as you mentioned, the factory model of schooling was never really built around that idea. It was individual achievement and skill building. And I wonder what you think here today in 2024 about that idea that learning by doing is almost maybe inherently a team-based activity. I mean, you can learn by doing alone, for sure. But what's different when you learn together by doing as a team?
I think that's a great question. And I don't know where I got this from, but I once read a really cool article or maybe listened to a podcast, but it was the idea that arguments are not inherently a bad thing. Arguments are attempting to bring together different perspectives in order to come up with a truer understanding of what reality actually is, because no one person can have all the different perspectives. And so that you actually need and want a certain amount of healthy conflict on any team or in any society, because that's the only way that you can truly bring together as many of the perspectives and get at quote unquote reality as closely as possible. So I think that even though, there's things that can be done as individuals, anytime that we bring teams together, even if it's people working as individuals within a team, it's always going to be stronger because you're just going to bring more perspectives to it, because we are limited by our physical human bodies. We can only see but so many things at one time. We can only hear but so many things at one time. We
Mm-hmm.
have to work together as a team to gather as much data and information as possible to make good decisions.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kate. Well said. So, hey, everyone, we've been talking with Kate Maxlow. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Do you believe there's a better way for individuals to learn and fulfill their human potential than in traditional schools? If so, then join me on my 2 podcasts, The Future of Education and Future You, where we explore these issues and more. My name is Michael Horn, and I've been working to build a better future for all individuals for over 15 years. I'm the co-author of multiple books on the future of learning, including my latest, From Reopen to Reinvent. And you can also stay up to date with all my writing through my Substack newsletter, The Future of Education. Join me as we create the future of learning together.
What does the future of learning look like? All the big changes going on in tech and society these days are raising tough and fascinating questions about education and where it's going. We dig into those questions every week on the EdSurge podcast. I'm Jeff Young, an editor and a reporter at EdSurge, and I sit down with educators, students, and scholars for frank and in-depth conversations about how education is changing. You can find the EdSurge podcast wherever you listen, or just go to edsurge.com and click on the podcast link. I hope you'll check it out.
Hi, I'm Ricardo.
I'm Mary.
And I'm Liz.
And we co-host Course Stories, a podcast produced by the Instructional Design and New Media team at Arizona State University.
In this podcast, we tell an array of course design stories alongside other ASU online designers and faculty.
Join us as we talk to the course design experts about shaping the future of online education. Tune into Course Stories, where innovation meets instruction.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Course Stories!
Perfection.
Hey everyone, we are back with Kate Maxlow, who in 2020 received the Virginia Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development Leadership Award for her work coordinating efforts to innovate the Hampton City Schools curriculum. So Kate, there are a bunch of projects, past, present, and future, you have been a part of as a designer, team member, and or developer that I think our listeners need to know about. So to know these projects really is to know Kate Maxlow and her creativity and innovation and imagination. So let's take them one by one and have you, albeit somewhat briefly, bring these projects to life using what my sister Martha calls awesome adjectives and vivid verbs. God, she used to talk about that from when I was a little kid. So here we go. You ready?
I am ready, and I'm writing down awesome adjectives and vivid verbs.
Okay, great. So number one, what is the Hollywood to Hampton project and what is its secret sauce? And by the way, if Riley Brooker makes an appearance here, that would be very cool.
Okay. So the Hollywood to Hampton program is one of my favorite things. I've always loved movies. I love books. I love video games. I love the entertainment industry. And so Hollywood to Hampton was started with an organization called Next Generation Storytellers, which is run by two actors and directors, Jacob Young, who has won multiple Emmy Awards, and Trent Garrett, who has been in shows such as the Disney Channel's Andy Mack. And their idea was to leverage the power of online learning to bring information about the entertainment industry to schools and communities where they don't have as strong a presence in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. So Hampton City Schools, being a majority minority school division, we have a lot of students in the lower socioeconomic statuses, was a perfect place to start. And Trent's dad, Greg Garrett, is a local real estate agent. So, he's like, hey, you should talk to my son Trent and, see what you guys could do, because he's starting this online acting coaching business. And so Trent and Jacob and Jen Oliver, they came up with this idea that, oh my gosh, what if we created movies? What if short films that students write and they direct and they act in, and they can learn all about the entertainment industry, plus get, IMDb credentials that when they leave K-12, not only do they understand about a movie set and how it works, but they've actually been introduced to all of these mentors, these Hollywood professionals, and just giving them a huge leg up over someone who just decides to, drive out to LA one day, because now they have all this knowledge and they have they can actually say, look, I wrote a film that was in the Virginia Film Festival.
Wow.
So it's pretty amazing. All four of our films last year, Hampton City Schools was the first one to do this project. All four of those films made it into the Virginia Film Festival, and we took a bunch of the kids, including Riley Brooker, who wrote the film Click, which ended up winning our Best Picture and Best Screenplay Writer Award. We took a bunch of those kids to Charlottesville, Virginia, and they got to be a part of the film festival. They had people coming up to them, after watching the short films and asking them questions. They got to see, their actual projects and themselves on the big screen. It's truly I hate to keep saying this, but truly a magical experience. And then this year, working Next Generation Storytellers has expanded. So they actually are working with a couple schools in Charleston, as well as Newport News Public Schools here in Virginia as well. So we're going to have 11 films in the film festival this year.
Oh my God, Kate, that is just so fantastic. You know, what really spoke to me as I was reading about this is that my schooling experience, as I've said many times on this show, was miserable pretty much all the way through K through 12. Middle school was particularly miserable, but high school was as well. I just wasn't engaged ever, except for once in high school. And the one teacher who taught a film class, it was called Fiction and Film, and you took works of fiction and you, as a student, actually attempted to bring part of that work of fiction to life in a film. That's the one thing that has stuck with me for 50 years. And it is my North Star when it comes to what school could be, was that experience back in 1975. So this is just like the coolest thing. And I wish we could do a whole episode just on this one topic, but we have to move on. So number 2, what is the future of learning experience, or FLEX, and how is there magic in escape rooms?
Okay, so the future of learning experience is a virtual school for students in grades K through 6. It came about during COVID because when COVID shut everything down and our district had to go 100% virtual, the very first thing I did was say, well, I got to teach myself how to teach kids online because I know I'm good in person, but what is it? How is that going to happen online? And so we ended up offering free online classes to employees' kids because our employees were all working at home. You know, our teachers are working at home. So we're like, hey, why don't you come and they can spend an hour with us? And we tried out all different kinds of lessons just to see what actually would engage students at different grade levels online. And I had seen some online breakout rooms or escape room style games on a platform called OutSchool, where I'd also practiced teaching as well. And I was like, I think we can try this. And so we tried it out with some of our employees' kids, and they absolutely loved it. And they were begging for more classes like that. While the rest of the nation was saying virtual learning doesn't work, we had kids begging to have more of these type of classes. So we're like, you know what? Apparently it does, or it can work. As soon as you understand that online pedagogy is not the same as in-person pedagogy, and you build these really amazing experiences. And so we had a section of students for whom online learning worked a lot better for various reasons. Maybe they, had special needs and their parents could sit right there with them and go over things with them multiple times. Maybe that helped. Maybe they didn't have as many distractions as they would in a classroom, or maybe, they were just really quick learners and they get through their learning really quickly and want to move on. And you can't always accommodate that in a regular classroom super easily. So thus was born the Future of Learning Experience, or FLEX for short, which is, like I said, for students in grades K through 6. We were able to start it for any school in or for any student in the state of Virginia could sign up, and they would actually be Hampton City School students, but we ended up with students all over the Commonwealth of Virginia. And what they do is Monday through Friday, they're doing this more traditional, but still very gamified lessons and things where they're gaining the knowledge and skills that they need. And then on Friday, we always have something called an immersive adventure. And that is where they actually participate in role plays or simulations. It might be escape rooms, it might be puzzle quests, breakout rooms, et cetera. And they have to take everything that they've learned and use it to complete this immersive adventure. And we went, from Fridays being the day that the fewest kids attended virtual learning during the pandemic to Fridays being the most attended days for our FLEX program, because nobody ever wants to miss the immersive adventure. Wow. One of our 4th grade ones actually ended on a cliffhanger. We literally had students crying because they were upset that they wouldn't find out what happened until they came back to school in August for 5th grade. Another kid who was saying, well, I just can't wait till Netflix puts this on and then I can just binge watch everything that happened. And that, again, it was just like, why isn't learning like this? I just love the idea of students crying because they can't do more learning right now.
Yeah. Wow. So, Kate, it happens every time in every episode. There is a moment where all of a sudden I get this huge feeling of wanting to be back in school. It just happened. Your description of FLEX has just made me go, oh, I wish I could go back 50 years and do it all over again. Oh, okay. All right. Number 3, Kate, you helped start a student internship program where students help create and review curriculum. And I was like, what? So how is this an example of what school could be? And by the way, this concept caught the attention of EdWeek, which is how I discovered your work, was reading that article about this topic. So how does this work?
It all started at, I believe it was a Learning Forward conference. I was there with one of my then colleagues, Kelly Cito. She now works in a different school division. But we went to a session on culturally responsive curriculum. And one of the things they talked about there was how you really need to build curriculum with the people who are going to be the ones learning the curriculum. And we went out to lunch and we're like, why don't we do this? Students know what they find interesting. They're the ones closest to the student perspective because it is their perspective. Why are we spending all this time guessing what they're going to like when we could just ask them what they like?
Right.
And then, given that we, like I said, we're a school division that has students who frequently are in lower socioeconomic statuses and households, we're like, well, why do we pay them to do it? We have various grant funds that we could use. What if we paid students to review curriculum, or in some cases even create curriculum, and we pay them more than they're going to make at a fast food restaurant or even Starbucks? It's hard to compete with Starbucks, but we did it. And there are all kinds of hoops and everything that we ended up jumping through, but we persevered, we figured it out. We've had, couple dozen students at this point who we train them in curriculum writing and the basics of curriculum theory. We don't require a specific GPA. We just require a work ethic and an interest in helping to change the face of education.
Wow.
Because we want we want kids for whom school works really well already, but we also want the kids for whom school is not working so that they can tell us what we need to be doing differently. And it's been a very successful program. I have parents who contact me all the time, or students who contact me and say, hey, how do I get in on this? So it's really cool. They start at $19 an hour, and it's made all the difference for some of our students by being able to do this.
So amazing. And we literally could do a whole episode, even around the idea of the cultural shift that happens with faculty and students when you have something like this underway, because the faculty clearly have to make some adjustments in the way that they think and what they feel. And as was mentioned in the article, there's some really interesting angles to this where faculty have to learn how to receive constructive feedback, which is not something that they would normally get from the students. Anyway, we could do that episode, but we can't. We have to move on to number 4, Kate. So You have a couple projects in development, and I hope I've got this right. The first is Saga City, and the second is Hampton reads and writes one book, ! So our listeners want to know what these are all about. Ready, set, go.
Sure. So growing up, I was an avid reader. I loved reading. What I did not always like was being told what to read and having to answer a bunch of really boring questions about what I read. And so, but I love adventure, and I love the idea of students being a part of their learning. We talked about immersive adventures with Flex. And so, but I love writing too. Like, I really enjoy writing. And so it came to me that, why don't we create a platform that it's not exactly choose your own adventure. First of all, that title is copyrighted, but where students or young people can read things that they love and then help to determine where the story will go next. And so, having a platform, Saga City, which of course is the word sagacity or wisdom, and it's together, where they can go and they can look up what are some different, what am I interested in? Am I interested in something on mythology? Am I interested in something in space? Am I interested in more realistic fiction? And they can choose that, and then it'll be sort of serialized, right? So where you'll read like 2 or 3 pages, and then there'll be a choice, and the readers actually get to vote on what they want to happen in the next part of the story. And there'll be opportunities for them to, submit persuasive arguments about why other people should vote the way that they're voting, or submit, pictures of what they think the various characters look like, or make predictions about what's going to happen, all in a very controlled environment, so that educators and families know that it's a very safe community built on the love of reading and the love of creating. So that's one thing. And that actually leads into the Hampton Reads and Writes One Book program, where previously we've had the Hampton Reads One Book, where we go out and we purchase a book, and then all the students in a variety of grade levels will read it. So sometimes it's every student in K-5, could be K-8, sometimes, K through 2 might have one book, 3 through 5 might have another book. But what we're going to do this year is actually work with some of our writers, especially some of our writers from the Hollywood to Hampton Project, who we know are really strong writers, and have them write the book, put it on the Saga City platform, and then the students who are all reading the book in their classrooms or with their families can then vote on what's going to happen next.
Wow.
And so in that way, we're going to, collectively, everybody's going to, in some ways, be an author of this book, but we're also able to then launch some of our really talented high school writers. They could then potentially come back and write more for this platform, and they have an audience who's already been reading their work, who knows the quality of what they can do. And in the meantime, I'm going to be providing them with editing, and here's how we outline a story, and so kind of giving them some of that writing practice as well, so that those students who do want to be writers, they'll be able to say, look, I was published, you can read what I did online, and they're getting some of that instruction around creative writing as well, all while entertaining elementary school students.
Wow. Breathtaking. That's amazing. And when you take all 4 together, everything that we just talked about, that's just, wow, Kate, I'm smiling from ear to ear, and just thinking about how much joy there is for kids to be involved in all of these projects. And again, the Hollywood project just really speaks to me, because I've produced 3 documentary films, and I know what it feels like to go through that process. It's hard work, but wow, the results are huge. And also, one of the things that I learned in that process is the success of your project is complicated, but a lot of the time it's determined by the audience's reaction to your product. And of course, that's a real learning experience, right? So amazing, just amazing. Okay, so Kate, we're going to do one more question before we go to our second break. And forgive me, this is a big one. We're going to kind of head up to the 30,000 foot level here. So you shared with me a list of books that have had an outsized influence in your life. So painfully, we need to set aside Catch-22, which rocked my world 50 years ago, the Icewind Dale trilogy, Understanding by Design, and Deciding What to Teach and What to Test, so that we can focus for a minute on Orwell's 1984. So I, too, was gutted when I finished Orwell's book, although those many years ago. So here's my question. I have a dream, Kate, that someday soon, every educator in America will question authority and do it skillfully and publicly, not just in the lunchroom. So what can you share with our educator listeners about the ways one can develop the skills, habits, and dispositions of someone who questions authority skillfully? And to what extent is knowing that all of education is totally made up important to becoming a skilled questioner of authority?
That is a big question. Okay, it's interesting. I was actually in the middle of just writing a blog on the nature of science and signature pedagogies in science. So forgive me, I'm going to start there.
Okay.
But the idea is that too often we teach science as a compendium of knowledge course, right? That here's a whole bunch of facts you need to go learn. But what science as a discipline, which of course all disciplines are made up, but the whole purpose of this discipline of science is to actually teach a process for drawing conclusions based upon rigorous, tested, and verified data. And so I think that it's really important that, and this leads into the idea of if we are teaching students that, first of all, not all data are equal, and that there are times that you question things as opposed to not questioning things. Like, we need to give them processes for identifying when it is time to question, what specifically you need to be questioning, how you go about doing the questioning based upon the specific situation. And we need to give them opportunities to practice all of this. It's not, just like you can't say that, science is just doing research on Google and, using anecdata, as they call it. And well, my cousin's friend said that so-and-so had a bad reaction to such and such, so obviously we should never do that. That's not good data. That's not what data is. That's not the process of science. We need to give students very specific times that they are meant to question authority in safe ways, but have them work through what that process looks like and identify when they need to do that, the best way to do that based upon the situation, so that when they are confronted with it in real life, they know how to do it in a way that makes sense for the specific situation.
Wow. So, okay, quick follow-up then. I'm just thinking about how what you've just described changes the role of the teacher, and that part of that change that a teacher goes through, if they understand that they're questioning authorities, is that, for example, you and I studied history, I taught history. Instead of filling kids up with facts, we're teaching them to be historians. Or if I'm a chemistry teacher, I'm teaching my kids to be chemists or to be writers, right? I mean, is that a fair way of looking at it?
Yes, that is the whole idea behind the idea of like the signature pedagogy, is that you are teaching students not just the knowledge that they need, but how to actually think and work and act with integrity in the specific discipline that they are looking into doing as a career one day.
Wow. And what I had to do, Kate, as a teacher years ago was to skillfully question authority in terms of switching myself from a deliverer of content to the facilitator of the process that you described of becoming a historian. That's what I wanted for my kids. I was just lucky that my classroom was on the edge of campus and very few people were paying attention to what I was doing, because I think that I may have been shut down in that process. But anyway, again, this is like a whole episode that we could do about it. And there's a lot of magic, by the way, since magic has been our theme throughout here in learning how to question authority. There's a crazy moment, Kate. When I was coming out of my classroom at this one school I was teaching at, I was accosted by a parent who upbraided me for a question authority bumper sticker that I had in my car. And he was like, how could you do that? How could a teacher have a question authority bumper sticker? And I was like, dude, I'm not telling your daughter to stop listening to you. I'm just, you know where I'm going with that, right? So It's crazy. All right. Hey, everyone. We have been talking with Kate Maxlow. Stay with us. We will be right back.
Hey there. Are you interested in hearing weekly conversations with authors, leaders, and practitioners at the forefront of learning and education innovation? Then you'll love the Getting Smart podcast. This podcast amplifies the incredible work being done by some of the most innovative minds in education. Learn new leadership styles, new technologies, new frameworks and mindsets, and get the fuel you need to stay motivated and curious. Together, we can empower all learners to thrive. It's available at gettingsmart.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, friends. This is Toy Hirschman from EntreEd. It is my great honor to uplift this excellent podcast, What School Could Be. As always, we are super excited to support innovation in education. We've been lucky enough to feature some of the incredible What School Could Be educators on our podcast. If you are looking to be inspired by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial educators and other great minds from across the world, check out the EntreEd Talk podcast, and please like and subscribe and leave a review. Thanks for tuning in.
Are you ready to shake things up in the classroom? Then get ready to blast off into the future of education with the Teacher Nerds podcast. Join Joe DiPaolo and Ron Nober as they share their own experiences, as well as talk with guests who are experts and innovators in education. From engaging teaching techniques to the latest educational technology, this podcast is a must-listen for anyone passionate about the future of learning. Subscribe and get ready to learn with the Teacher Nerds podcast.
Hey everyone, we are back with Kate Maxlow, who EdWeek designated as a leader to learn from in 2024. So Kate, I am fascinated by the awards educators win. I love thinking about how an award is generated and who might have been behind its why and its process. So in your case, EdWeek, which is one of the most well-read education publications in the nation, awarded you as one of its 2024 EdWeek Leaders to Learn From. So by the way, I love the title of that award. It's very cool.
Yeah.
So what does it feel like, Kate, to be spotlighted as a leader to learn from? Like, what are the skills, habits, and dispositions you think earned you this EdWeek distinction? And by the way, I know this is a big meta question, but here in 2024, almost 2 years into the age of artificial intelligence, what are the skills, habits, and dispositions needed to be a leader to learn from in the age of AI? I know that puts two things together there, but go for it.
So first of all, answering the question of, how did it feel? I think as educators, we're not always used to being in the spotlight. I mean, obviously you join education because you want to help the lives of young people. And so part of it was, uncomfortable in many ways. And of course, nothing is ever done as one person, right? I mean, you're talking earlier about the importance of teamwork. And so absolutely, I don't think I could have been done as many things if I hadn't been in a place like Hampton City Schools that was so innovative and was ready to try those things and to let me continually question authority, as we just said. So here I'm getting into some of the skills and habits and dispositions of what it means to be a leader. Thinking about our student internship program, I remember, driving everyone in HR crazy at first because I'm like, well, can we hire students? Do they have to be 16? Obviously, it's easier if they're 16, but what if they're 15? What if they're 14? And so, that's one of the skills is to, of course, they're like, well, we don't hire students. And I said, I know we don't currently, but what if we did? And so having to continually ask, but what if we did? And then you have to have the research skills because then I had to go and spend a lot of time looking up, Virginia code and when can we hire students and under what conditions. And it wasn't exactly clear on the website. So then, having someone get on the phone with the actual Department of Labor.
Yeah.
And all of that is hard. And so another disposition is you can't give up the first time it gets hard.
Yeah.
We also went round and round and round with our payroll on, well, what's the best way to pay our students? Students don't necessarily have checking accounts, especially if they're 14 or 15. So what is that going to look like? What's the easiest way? Do we have to have them clock in and out? Okay, wait a minute, they're clocking in and out, but they have Chromebooks and their Chromebooks aren't set up to have the programs that teachers use to do all of these things. And so, I mean, it was hard. It was really hard. And so you have to have the perseverance and you have to believe that it's the right thing at the end of the day and that you're not going to not do the right thing because the right thing is hard and because it's never been done before. So I would say those are the dispositions that we need. First of all, we need to question, well, why don't we hire students?
Yeah.
Should we hire students? And then once you decide, yes, the answer is that we should. Okay, so what is standing in the way and how do we get over those obstacles? I was so excited because, it's been a few years, but we finally even have a student worker application form just for student workers on the Hampton City Schools HR page now. And that was just and not only is it something that we can do now, it is solidified as something that we do, and we have systems and processes in place for it, which that's when the change happens, is when you actually have those systems and structures set up to support what we value and what we believe in.
Wow. And so, Kate, is it different now to be a leader to learn from in the age of AI? Well, let me put it this way. Do you believe that this is a fundamental shift or just another big disruption that a leader to learn from has to navigate and work her way through?
I think that it's, time will tell. The possibilities are huge. So I know that, for instance, I was writing a grade 6 science test and I go to ChatGPT and I'm like, hey, can you write me a test question that assesses this standard? And it never gives me a perfect one. So that expert opinion and judgment is still needed, or I might need to make a graphic for it or, tweak it. But it cuts down so much on my time. The first thing I did was go and ask ChatGPT. I put the website for First Spark in there and said, what are 10 qualities you would expect an executive director to have? And then we took those as the hiring committee and we were able to, tweak them and make them fit for us. But it just saved so much initial time. And so I think that, in order to get more done, I believe that we absolutely should be using AI. But I also believe that it's our duty to teach our staff and also our students how to use AI both responsibly and ethically. So responsibly means the fact that I don't just take everything it says as fact, that there's always going to be that human element reviewing it and checking and making sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then, ethically, of course, I'm not passing off work as my own. I tell people when it's generated by ChatGPT or what have you. So I think that educators absolutely, we can't afford to think of AI as just one more thing that we need to avoid or to shut it down. It's going to be in every career very soon, if it isn't already, and it is already in many. And so if we do not learn how to use it and we don't train our students how to use it ethically and responsibly, we are effectively locking our students out of a lot of potential careers. And that's not fair to young people.
Wow, amazing. Just returning for a sec to what you were talking about in terms of kids being hired, Kate, and also returning way back to the beginning of this conversation about the internship program where students were evaluating curriculum and generating new curriculum. I was just reminded, this happened yesterday. We all get these emails from folks, administrators, and they're like, hey, we just lost the teacher and we're trying to find somebody to hire. If you could spread the word, right? We get those emails and it's always like, oh, I don't know what to do with this, right? Everybody's trying to find teachers at this point. And this was coming from an independent high school principal. So I just replied to him, and I was actually inspired by you, by the internship program. And I said to this guy, Steve, Steve, what do you think about hiring a group of senior students to actually team teach a physics engineering course? And, and we went back and forth on that. It had not occurred to him. And I was just thinking, boy, there are ways that we can step outside the box that are so exciting. But anyway, that's a whole nother episode in itself. Okay, Kate, yeah. I gotta return to something that you talked about a little bit earlier. I just think it would be good for clarification, but I'm gonna do it via a blog that you wrote. So
okay.
at eObservations, you have written a number of blogs, which I really enjoyed reading. One in particular jumped out at me titled Signature Pedagogy Series Part 1, Why Good Teaching is Good Teaching Can Be a Harmful Myth. So you mentioned signature pedagogies a minute ago. What is that for our listeners? Tell us a little bit more.
Sure. Signature pedagogies is a term that was originally coined by Schulman in 2005. And it's the idea that we should be teaching students in the way in which that career is done in real life. And it was originally made more for higher education. So for instance, if a student is training to become a doctor, they should actually be participating in rounds. They're not just sitting and memorizing a whole bunch of things from a textbook. If a student is training to be a lawyer, they should actually be participating in, reviewing case studies and arguing and, moot courts and all those kinds of things. But I think it's really important to bring it down to K-12 as well, because a science classroom should not be taught in the same way that a reading classroom is taught, which should not be taught in the same way that, a history classroom may be taught.
Yeah.
If kids are taking an engineering course, they should absolutely be working on like AutoCAD and actually using 3D printers and creating things like that. But it's not just about the doing of the things, it's also about what we talked earlier with the idea of how we think, the habits of mind of the discipline, but also how to act with integrity. And I think that's something we leave out way too often for that particular discipline. So, what does it mean to be a doctor with integrity? What does it mean to have integrity in terms of a science experiment? What does it mean to have integrity in terms of reviewing primary sources and those kinds of things? So yeah, I'm super fascinated by that. And the idea that we can have these signature pedagogies for the different disciplines that not only will help students better learn those disciplines, because it'll be things like using the concrete representational abstract for mathematics, but also help them when they go out into the career fields, because they will have already been thinking and acting and, understanding the moral obligations of that particular discipline.
Wow. So amazing. For me, Kate, truly, the magic happened when I began to shift very early in my teaching career towards the primary sources. Just watching kids dive in and really struggle with the puzzle that is historical primary sources.
Yep.
It's an infinite puzzle, really. You cannot come to any really definitive conclusion because there's always going to be something out there that could change it. But it truly is magic when that happens.
Yes.
And I just believed in that moment that I had to keep moving forward with that signature pedagogy approach because it was preparing kids for real life in that way.
Yep.
It was making real life happen right there in the classroom.
Absolutely.
So, Kate, we all have these crazy, awesome moments in our educator and or professional practice that we look back on with fondness and nostalgia. So an innovative lesson, a small step that changed everything, a collaboration with another educator, a team project, an interaction with a learner, a transformative moment, and so on. So you start every session, albeit with students or teachers and teachers, by imagining someone named Gerald is sitting right next to you. So who is Gerald? And what essential question did he bring every time you started a new topic or unit that really, really shaped who you are as an educator?
Absolutely. Gosh, I love Gerald. Gerald was one of my fourth grade students in one of my last years of teaching. And Gerald was so brilliant, but also had this really deep need to know why he had to learn something. And if he did not feel like the answer that I gave on why he had to learn it was good enough, he would very quickly start to entertain himself in other ways that would potentially bring mayhem to the classroom. And so I quickly learned that the best way to engage all of my students, because Gerald could also be the biggest cheerleader for whatever I was talking about, like he could get all the kids on board with things and in ways that like were amazing. I learned that I had to start every single lesson with, and here's why you need to know this. And I would look right at him, and if he bought into it, once he started nodding, I was like, okay, it's going to be a great lesson. Like we're going to be great. And if he looked at me skeptically, I knew that I needed to make some changes real quick because the lesson was going to go very differently. But I think of him all the time because why shouldn't we tell kids why they have to learn it? I mean, what kind of reason is because I said so?
Yeah.
As teachers, the first thing teachers will do when they're in a professional development session they don't feel is worth their time is let you know it and say this is a waste of time. So why would we not give young people the exact same courtesy of saying, hey, somebody somewhere thinks it's worthwhile for you to know this and let me explain why. I think that's really imperative that we do that, in addition to the fact that kids are actually going to learn better when they know why it's important to know it.
Yeah. Love that, Kate. And I'm thinking back to my years as a history teacher, that when I got that question, and I certainly did get that question, the answer, the really authentic answer where I could connect with students was not about me explaining, why something was important. It's actually the how you're learning it part that is important.
Yeah.
So when they would ask me, like, what's important about learning history? It'd be like, well, that's a pretty wild question, like, why is history important? But let's talk about how you learn it. And now you're digging into the primary sources. What's happening to you as you're doing that, right? Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to what we talked about, signature pedagogies like that, the signature pedagogies get at why you're doing this, because we're not doing science so that you can learn the different layers of soil. I don't remember the different layers of soil, even though I taught it.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the process for, asking questions and devising fair tests and making conclusions from data. Like that's why we do science, and we learn about how to do that by learning about the soil, which we can then use in other ways that help our civilization. But it's not about memorizing the layers of soil.
Right. And going back to the Hampton to Hollywood project, Kate, it feels to me like certain beautifully constructed learning processes like that, they sort of answer the why question in and of themselves. Like kids who are making those films and are becoming storytellers aren't really spending a lot of time wondering why they're doing it. Is that also a fair way of looking at it?
Yes. But also when we first start our screenwriting classes, the very first thing we always start with is, what do you want to say? Like, what's important to you? What is the message that you are trying to get out by creating something? And sometimes they just say, I just want the world to be a funnier, happier place. And it's like, okay, then let's write you a comedy. Great. But sometimes they're like, I want people to understand the impacts of racism, or, how mental health affects young people. And we're like, okay, so now we're going to write a story based upon that. But so even though they don't necessarily say, why am I doing this? It's because it's intrinsically fun is why they're doing it. But we do get it. But what is it that you want to say? And then how are we going to build the rest of the film around, what your purpose is here?
Yeah, super interesting. So, Kate, before we go into the last question, I just want to ask, what's next for Kate Maxlow? Where are you headed here in July of 2024? What's life going to be like for you in the months and years ahead?
So I don't necessarily know. I like to give myself a lot of freedom. So where I'll be in 5 years, who can say? I do know that I will always be working with young people and helping them, discover their purpose and what they want to do and the best ways to do it. In the short term, I'm going to be doing some more work with next generation storytellers. So not just Hollywood to Hampton, but, bringing it to other districts or hopefully around the globe as well.
Fabulous.
So that we can give voice to even more students, really working with getting Saga City off the ground so I can enjoy more of my writing and helping to hone new writers as well, new writers and readers. Still working with Hampton City Schools part-time. So, in more of a consultancy fashion around curriculum. And I have a lot of consulting projects that I'm doing, specifically mostly around curriculum. So either project-based learning or, how do we write curriculum, signature pedagogies, all of those things. So it's a little bit of everything, which I think is absolutely fabulous because you've probably noticed that I'm not a specialist. I'm a generalist. I like to know a lot of things about a lot of things.
Yeah. That's been a question I've asked many guests over the many episodes of this podcast, is the David Epstein range question about specialization versus generalization. And you are definitely a generalist, and you know how to find the magic in the mundane, Kate. So, all right. You know that I typically end episodes by giving guests the opportunity to shout out to someone upon whose shoulders they stand, that person or persons who mentored, coached, guided, sponsored, and lifted them up. So in your case, you cited James, your husband, and your daughters, Lyra and Esme. So taken together, in what ways do you carry these three loved ones with you each day as you work to make education relevant and meaningful? And tell us about your dragging James to murder mystery dinners and immersive theater experiences.
So James, my husband, I can't imagine doing life without him. I mean, I can't imagine, but it's not anything I would ever want to do. And as you might expect with me, kind of all over the place and flitting around from topic to topic, he's very practical and he's very logical, and he absolutely keeps this family with groceries so that we can make dinner. He's also brilliant in and of himself. And so when I do come up with, crazy ideas, and I'm like, hey, what if we blah, 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 he's really good at working through the practicalities of it and asking really good questions that make me rethink it and not just, go rushing off from one thing to another, but really consider, is this a thing that's worth my time and energy? And so for all those reasons, just absolutely love him. And he definitely encourages my creativity. And he does, because I'm like, hey, what if we go to this murder mystery dinner? Or why don't we try out this escape room? Or I know one time for his birthday, I took him we stayed in an Airbnb that was actually based on Bilbo Baggins' Hobbit house.
Oh my, wow.
Yeah. and he goes along with all of it. And, he's more that he sees the adventure in it. And we always talk about, even if we try something out and it doesn't go the way that we expected, at least we have a really fun story to talk about afterwards. And so, yeah, he absolutely comes along on all these adventures, and sometimes even finds some himself that we can go on. And then when it comes to Lyra and Esme, I know I was a good teacher before I had kids. I think having kids made me a great teacher because, you suddenly look at every single lesson as, is this something I would want my kids doing? And not just yourself, but in a way that I don't know if you look at before. You start to realize just how beautiful all the differences in all of our kids are. And you just appreciate them in a way that I did not before I had kids.
Yeah.
Maybe others can do it without having kids, but it really helped me. And so I think about that. I'm like, what is the world I want my kids to live in? Okay, how am I going to build that then? What am I going to do? And what opportunities do I want my kids to have? How do I bring those opportunities to others as well? And so, yeah, my family is very much at the core of everything I do, as the reasons that I do it and the ways in which I'm able to do it.
That's awesome, Kate. So what we'll do is we'll dedicate this episode to James and Lyra and Esme, and also to Gerald, because Gerald is important.
Gerald is important.
They are the giants upon whose shoulders we stand. That's awesome. So, Kate Maxlow, thank you so much for the time today. Wow, this has been such a fun and magical conversation. I cannot wait to get this episode out to our listeners. What School Could Be will be cheering you on as you move forward with all of your projects and all the things that you're working on, and you're literally helping a huge number of people understand what school could be. And that's just really profound to us. So thank you for your time today, and good luck in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Our editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurohara. Our theme music is created by a remarkable pianist, Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all major music platforms. You can also find his work on his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and 2,000 cities. We'd be grateful if you would support these episodes with leading edge, innovative and imaginative educators and students by giving us your own rating and writing a review wherever you get your podcasts. This series is sponsored by Education Change Agent, Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the award-winning documentary film, Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be. If you are committed to rolling up your sleeves and joining thousands of educators, business professionals, nonprofit leaders, and parents as we reimagine education to be relevant and learner-centered, please join the What School Could Be global online community. Simply log in to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or download the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to josh@whatschoolcouldbe.org. Follow the show on Twitter @WSCB Podcast and on LinkedIn @Josh Rapoon. Listeners, one of the most important things we all can do is to bring kindness and compassion into the world. For sure, we need a surplus of both right now. Until next time, ahui ho, and thank you for listening to the What School Could Be podcast.